Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Pulido. I am a community organizer with ACTIONN, and I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight. We are joined with Councilperson Jenny Breckes, Mr. J.D. Drakulich, Ms. Rudy Leon, Ms. Darla Fink, and Councilperson Devin Race.
My name is Lily Barron. I'm also a community organizer, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening.
Sorry, I was muted. Very Zoom. I would like to start and let everyone know that as ACTIONN, we are a 501c3 nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse any political party or candidate. We've reached out to every candidate to participate in this event and have given equal opportunity to participate in the forum for all of the candidates. Over the course of 2020, ACTIONN has worked with our leaders and Southern Nevada Partnerships Faith Organizing Alliance to put together a new normal platform that calls on us to reconsider our community's priorities and to center racial justice in our organizing work. This is our new normal platform. COVID-19 has revealed the brokenness and injustices of our systems and society. Communities of color have been disproportionately impacted both in loss of life and livelihood. In the midst of an ongoing housing crisis, thousands of Nevadans are living in fear of evictions and permanent job loss. Nevadans are faced with unimaginable cuts to already inadequate budgets. Our Black community members continue to face decreased access to vital services and over-policing of their communities. Elected leaders in our states are trying to get back to the old normal with band-aid solutions that ignore the roots of injustices laid before us. We are tired of waiting. It's time to reimagine the status quo. This is why we have created the New Normal campaign, because it's time to boldly and proactively build the beloved community as the new normal. We need to prioritize where our funding and resources go in order to build this new normal. ACTIONN has worked on candidate and voter engagement work throughout 2020, and we have focused on civic engagement work, the census and voter and candidate engagement. And throughout these efforts, we have registered over 3,000 voters, and largely in Latinx communities. We have sent over 40,700 text messages to help Washoe County residents complete the census, register to vote, and to be able to vote in this unique election year. We've called on thousands of inactive voters to help ensure that they would be able to receive their ballots. Our primary voter guide received over 3,500 views, and we engaged with 35 candidates throughout the Washoe County in the primary and 23 in the general election. Our general election voter guide is available on our website at action.org/voterguide. Through these efforts, we hope to build a more inclusive democracy in which we bring the voices of people most excluded from our democracy to the forefront of conversations about how we build our community. We want to deeply invite our elected officials and those who seek that honor to be part of this inclusive democracy. Tonight is part of that work. We thank you for joining us during what is certainly a stressful and busy election cycle, during a strange and new time that is challenging for all of us. We are excited to be able to discuss the most important issues of racial and economic justice with you tonight.
Now we will have 2 minutes for each candidate to introduce themselves. Please enable your chat so you can see when your time is up. You will have a warning when you have 30 seconds remaining. Every candidate will be called in alphabetical order. Our first candidate for introduction is Councilperson Breckes.
Hi, thank you, ACTIONN, for hosting this tonight. It's very good to see all of you, and thank you for all of the work that you do. I'm excited about your new campaign. It very much resonates with me because I decided in 2011 to run for city council because a lot of money had been spent in the prior good economic years before the Great Recession, but I did not believe that those reflected the priorities of our citizens. The city came through that recession with a lot of debt, which handcuffed what they could do for their residents, and also had laid off about a third of its workforce. So those were challenging times to provide services to a population in need. But as we grew during this last growth period, the precept of growing and equity to all people in Reno, regardless of where you live, your neighborhood's been very important to me. And in doing that, I've had to stand up to a lot of special interests that have economic gain at stake at the city, because I want to reinvest in our older neighborhoods, which is where a lot of people of color and people facing difficult economic circumstances live, and they should have the same quality parks and traffic safety and infrastructure as everyone else in the community, particularly those in that outlying areas. I see I have 25 seconds, so I keep my timer on. I am running a campaign of great optimism because this is going to be a big reset going forward. I understand the complexity of the issues that we face, how to adjudicate among interests, particularly toward equitable outcomes. I've been involved with cities my entire career. I'm a city planner by training, and I'm looking forward to a third term and asking the voters of Ward 1 to send me back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilperson Breckus. Mr. Draculich, you have 2 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Action. Thank you so much for having us on. You guys have been so engaging through this process. I'm honored to be a part of this and also to be running and represent my ward. So thank you to everybody. A lot of people on here and watching probably don't know enough about me. Born and raised here, 4th generation Nevadan. Actually lived in my ward for 33 years, went through the public school system, graduated from Reno High in 2000. So needless to say, very connected to this immediate neighborhood and the people in it. I'm also a husband and a father to a 7-year-old little boy. He's currently going to Jesse Beck. So a big part of my run is I wanted to make decisions and an impact on my community so that he has a community he wants to live and raise his children in when he gets older. So decisions we make today will impact his decision in 10 to 15 years as to where he wants to raise his family. Main catalyst for my run is I was fortunate enough in 2016 to be invited onto the board to the Eddy House. I'm sure most of the people on here know about that organization. Very proud of them. I committed a lot of time and energy. Once I saw the problem, my heart really went out to them. Soon became the secretary on their board, then VP, and now in my 2nd term as their board president. Really happy and proud that we guided them from a drop-in center. We were operating Monday through Friday, 10 to 5. And knew that we needed to get these kids an overnight facility to really have some true success with them. And led them from that drop into a 24/7 facility. Really proud of that process. A lot of people ask me how I want to make an impact on this population. I believe strongly in prevention and housing. And I could probably go on forever. I know I've only got a couple more minutes. So thank you again. I'll let you guys keep going.
Thank you very much, Mr. Draculich. Ms. Fink, you have 2 minutes.
Hello, my name is Darla Fink. This is why I'm running for Reno City Council Ward 5 and why you should vote for me. I grew up here, so I've lived the changes that challenge our community. I'm a graduate of UNR, have a master's degree in public administration. I obtained my real estate license when I was 19 and worked out of my parents' real estate firm, then in casinos, and finally at the Department of Labor Job Corps out in Stead. There, I had the privilege of spending the next 23 years helping provide job training and education to a diverse population of at-risk youth. I started at the bottom on Graveyard in the dorms and ended up as the director of finance and then the deputy center director till I left a couple years ago. So now I'm here running for office because I feel the city of Reno, Ward 5, needs my education and experience, but most of all, my integrity. My opponent, the incumbent, would be serving her last allowable term in the office, so she has no reason to represent the interests of Ward 5 because she can't be held accountable for re-election. And worse than that, she accepted money from developers and casino interests. Check out her contributions and expense reports on the Secretary of State site, and you'll see she filed late in 2019, hiding those contributions from the citizens of Reno for a full year. Most recently, as reported by RGJ, she accepted $30,000 from the developers of the controversial Daybreak project in South Reno and $10,000 from the developers who tore down Lake Ridge tennis courts. My opponent failed to recuse herself on both of these projects. Is this the kind of representation you want? Where's the honesty, integrity, and transparency? I assure you I've taken no contributions from outside influences, only family members and a few friends and neighbors. And if any projects came before the city council, I would recuse myself if they were involved.
Thank you, Ms. Fink.
I'm-
Ms. Leon, you have 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. I want to thank Action for this opportunity. I think it's great, the questions that you have asked and putting together the voter guide and getting people together to engage like this. My name is Rudy Leon. I am running for Ward 3 City Council. Ward 3 is the area, if wards were straight lines, from Virginia Street to the east and from Oddie down to Hidden Valley. There are a lot of breaks in that. So I have lived in Reno for only 8 years. I know that for folks in Nevada, that's very little time at all. But I've spent my life before that following an academic career and moving in 7 states. I choose to live here. I've never lived anywhere for 8 years other than my childhood home. This is a place that I love and that I am committed to. In my career as a librarian, I work to connect people with resources. I moved on to university administration and learned was able to put into implementation management experience, managing people, managing budgets, figuring out how to make do with what sounds like a big budget, right? $10 million, $60 million, but it's never enough, right? So trying to figure out, just like the city, how do you do what's needful when you don't have that money? I decided, I forgot to start my timer. I decided to run a couple of years ago when I was concerned about some of the implications of decisions that the city council was making and that those implications weren't being paid attention to. And we inherit the decisions of those who come before us, and we pass along our decisions to the people who come after us. And we need more innovative and careful responses to the problems that we face so that we don't create new Lemon Valley flood zones, for example, in South Reno as we move forward. I look forward to answering the rest of the questions. I'm gonna let the next person go.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. Our next and final panelist is Councilperson Reese. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Barron and Action for having us. My name is Devin Reese. I have the privilege of serving as the at-large council member and also the current vice mayor for the city of Reno. I am honored to be here with all of you this evening. Certainly the issues that matter to Action and people of faith and good conscience are the same kind of things that I'm interested in. My story is very easy. Why I ran is really related to a phone call. When I was in 7th grade, I came home from school one afternoon, walked in on my mother on the phone. She was crying. And that was pretty brutal for me because it wasn't normal to see my mother, a nurse, cry. And so I asked her what happened, you know, imagining the worst. And she said, no, really what happened was we got our first house. And that moment has stuck with me and really resonates in my lifetime because having our first home when I entered 7th grade really allowed us to develop some deep roots. And it allowed us to move into a community where we were stable. We moved around a lot before then. And I think that that dream of home ownership is very far away from people at this time. And it seems like it's moving in the wrong direction. So the things that we can do as a community to ensure that people have housing, that we can make sure that their needs are met, are many of the things that Action is working on. And certainly I'm happy to participate in this forum tonight and share with you my vision for a positive vision for Reno. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Councilperson Reese. Now we're going to move on to our question segment. We have 2 people asking questions, Prince and Betty, and they will alternate. Candidates will again be called in alphabetical order. Prince, with your first question, please.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Prince Saruhan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I am a local community member and resident of Ward 2 in Reno. My first question is, the resurgence of Black Lives Matter has shined a spotlight on the failure of police departments throughout the country to truly ensure public safety. What would you do to address policing concerns impacting the Black and immigrant communities and reimagine public safety in our community? Thank you.
Thank you. Councilperson Breckus, you have 3 minutes.
All right, thank you for that question. So it's interesting you phrase it, the resurgence. Your question is the resurgence. because the chronology is an interesting discussion to have. And it's also exciting with our tie here to Colin Kaepernick, who, you know, our roots, and who has really been a part of, if you're going to say a resurgence of it. I think it's a very strong movement, and Black Lives Matter. There's been, and that is acknowledgement of social injustice over racism that's in our nation's history, and that has manifested in our policing and our criminal justice system. The Black Lives Matter is not like, you know, Action, where you have a platform and you can sign a membership form. It's a movement, and I think that's where it gets very sticky, but also very organic, in that it is to define locally what you're going to do about it. And in Reno, I do not believe it involves defunding the police. We're growing, and let me just say, the acknowledgement and the importance of Black Lives Matter then goes to what are you going to do about it in your local dynamics, because as it relates to policing, local policing is such a fragmented responsibility across our country. So you have to look at each jurisdiction, and sometimes they have overlapping police, sheriff, and so on. But in Reno, Nevada, I do not support defunding the police, because one, we're a very under-resourced city government as it is. We have fewer firefighters, police officers than we had 15 years ago, and we're a growing city and police involves in patrols, and they are spread thin. And I think part of the spreading thin is part of the reform that's needed. Is when you're going call to call, you can't do a good job. I know when I have a lot to do, I often don't do everything as well. My focus on police reform has been longstanding, and it's been multifaceted. It is giving them an organization in which there is clear chain of command and accountability. That's why, since I've come on to the Reno City Council in 2012, I worked to reestablish the audit function. And we have an auditor, and I've called every year for a comprehensive audit of the police department, and then every other department also, to help them reform to the best quality they can. I'm the liaison to the Civil Service Commission, which is an independent body that does the hiring and promotion for the police department. And I work with them on implicit bias training and the reform and bringing on the best police force we can. And the third thing that we are moving forward is looking into workmates comp issues. We cannot have police officers who need and are struggling on the job, because it is a traumatic experience for them and for the community when they are stressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Mr. Draculich. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Great question. I'm glad you brought it up. It's been asked many times over the past couple months. After George Floyd, and even before all that, I've always put a lot of thought into this, but after George Floyd and seeing not only even the protests in Reno, I took it upon myself, even during COVID, to make sure that I started to gain a lot of perspective from all sides. I reached out to police officers that I did and didn't know. I also tried to get connected to people that were inside the BLM organization. It was tough to get to the top of the ladder, but a couple of people that are very passionate about the organization and their cause, younger individuals, I sat with them and to learn more about what's going on and how they're feeling. So I feel like I have a pretty rounded perspective at this point. I do not support the defunding of police. I do believe our law enforcement have the most dangerous job in the community and do deserve our support. But I also believe in finding ways to enhance our police and how they can better serve all of our citizens. We should consider limiting the calls they arrive at and support social programs that fill that gap. Most importantly, people with mental health issues and non-violent emergencies. We should enhance training that focuses on de-escalation and safe ways to detain citizens who may be violent. I do not believe our local law enforcement should handle issues with our undocumented citizens. So I believe that'll help with that process if we don't burden them with that. And I also believe that if you have a gun and a badge, that our community should hold you to the highest standards, but I will not turn my back on law enforcement in the process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Ms. Fink, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, first off, I'd like to say, as I said earlier, that at Job Corps, I work with a very diverse population of at-risk youth. We would have occasion to have interaction with the police, which I have to say, in the 23 years plus that I worked there, was generally very supportive. They were very supportive of the cause for our students so that they could continue their job training and education. And we would have quarterly meetings with them and talk about trends that they saw, and we would tell them what we had been seeing. And it was a very good give and take situation. So, and that population is probably only 32% Anglo out there, and the rest was Black and Hispanic youth. So it was very diverse, and I never saw them being treated poorly. And that's a big deal. So when this whole thing jumped off and we had riots here in Reno, I was very shocked to see that happen, because I wasn't aware that that was really going on locally. And so I did reach out myself, as I was running for city council at that time already anyway. And I reached out to the Black and Hispanic communities. And I asked them what was their perspective on what was happening and what we could do better. And basically what they told me was exactly what I was doing, which was reaching out and seeing what they needed. And I believe that the city has been trying to do that. And I also believe that, of course, there's always room for improvement. I would have to piggyback on what the other candidates have said about we can't really cut back on the police force that we have here, which is already understaffed by national standards. So it seems to me that the most, prudent course of action would be to go forward with the funds that we can use to reach out and do more outreach. And I know that's happening already. So I think we just need to do a better job. I know that things have already changed in the police department as far as transparency and the use of body cameras, that footage coming out within 2 weeks. And, there's other things happening where they're not showing. Okay, well, so I feel like we're making progress, we're heading the right direction, and that by and large we have a community that tries to be responsive and to the best of our ability. And should you elect me to city council, I will make sure that that continues to happen and improve wherever possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fink. Ms. Avon, 3 minutes.
I have no idea how to answer this in 3 minutes. My literature that I got printed up in January for the Women's March states very clearly my belief in the need for police reform. I believe strongly that we need to build a different protective community services unit. I live in the Wells District. I've lived here for 4 years. I've called the police at least 8 times while I have lived here. They have shown up exactly 0 times. People who don't live in communities where there are gunshots on their street in front of their house don't have that experience, where they don't have street fights happening in front of their house. They don't have the experience of knowing when the police can show and when they won't show. I have 100% confidence that when I call from the closet because somebody is inside my house, that they will show up. I have the absolute same confidence that when I call and say somebody creepy is outside of my house, that they will not. The police that we have do not work for the city that we are. So just flat out, they may be underfunded, they may be understaffed. They don't work for the city that we are, and we need to re-envision that. I'm very data driven. So when I think about this in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, I turned to the data. I held a town hall with Brian Burgart from the Lethal Encounters data set and Brian Bayhuth, who had just started working with the bookings data. From the data that they have, we can see that 3 Black men have been killed by the Reno police in 20 years, which is a small number, but a statistically enormous number. And 62 is a shockingly big number. So we just generally have a police department that causes a lot of people in Reno to die, and that is a real problem. Having a police chief who does not see that as a real problem is a real problem. The bookings data shows a lot of racism, and that is very, very much not within the control of the Reno City Council, because it's generally the Highway Patrol and the sheriff where they're seeing the racist arrests going on. However, in all of that data, the FBI does not differentiate between white and Hispanic people. So we are going to need a lot more transparency from our departments to be able to distinguish what 46% of the people who live in Reno are experiencing, because it's all encompassed under white right now. So I came to this because I was tracking down information about the one rape case a year that goes to court. And I have had at least a half dozen horrifying comments from police officers about rape. They pass their sexual assault post-tests at astonishingly high numbers. On paper, they look like they rock handling sexual assault. This came to a pinnacle when the police officer who is responsible for informing people about sexual predators in their neighborhood told
Your
me—
time is up. I'm sorry.
Can I finish the sentence?
No, I'm sorry. We have to give every candidate the exact same amount of time.
It was horrifying. It was horrifying.
All right, Councilperson Reese, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. I want to first try to address very directly the question. Not only do Black Lives matter, but they should more than matter. I mean, this is our moment. I think to concretely address the question, we can first listen to and center Black folks in the conversations around the solutions. Second, we have to move beyond performative allyship, especially for me as a white person. Third, we can fully implement the Gwynn report, something that we've said we were going to do for a long time, but we just seem to move very slowly. Fourth, I think we can have a comprehensive review of the kinds of policies that affect the outcomes that we're all talking about. Fifth, we can recruit and retain police officers that are both qualified and diverse. If we want our community to be a reflection of our police department, then we should be recruiting in those communities of color, among the indigenous community, people of color, everywhere we can. Next, our budget should reflect our values. That's not to say that we should defund the police, but that's to say that we should take a moment to have the conversations. We're now an opportunity to reimagine public safety. And if that means shifting the resources to social workers, great. The truth is we have been underfunding and defunding our police systemically as a function of our budget for more than 20 years. So that we have to come together at this crucial moment and make choices about what we want to do and how we can reimagine. Your question is a good one because it asks both the genesis of the question and also suggests some reimagination. I think for my part, I'm willing to have those tough conversations. And I think that I will be someone who can help facilitate and bring the coalitions together that can make those hard choices happen. I'm honored to serve with Councilmember Breckus on the body currently, and I think we've made some strides. We've got a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Councilperson Reese. That concludes the first question, and it is an honor to introduce the next person who will be telling us a little bit about their experience and what they are doing for the community right now. My colleague Donald Griffin of Black Wall Street is going to tell us about himself. Welcome, Donald.
Thank you, thank you. I'm Donald Griffin. I have been at-risk youth, but what is blowing my mind is how you guys can answer about a Black America and nobody's on the panel Black. How anybody can pass any type of conversation where the only two Black people is just telling their story. You guys are making a decision about the Black community, and I don't see you guys out there shaking any Black leaders' hands, not coming to our meetings, not doing anything for the Black community. Defunding the police, no, hold them accountable. If they're caught and they do something wrong, take their pension away. That's how you punishing them. You don't have to defund them, take their lifestyle away. If they turn off their body camera, take their lifestyle away. Hold them accountable for the actions that they're doing. That's how you hold them accountable. Black Wall Street was started by Donald Griffin and Romar Tolliver in Reno, Nevada, August 1st, 2020. This nonprofit organization was formed to meet the needs of Black and underserved minorities. in Reno and Sparks area. The vision of Black Wall Street is to create an environment that would strengthen the at-risk youth. The mission for Black Wall Street is to provide resources and service to Black and unserved communities, which increases their lifestyles, being proud to be Black, men, women, and children. So I think you guys need to get I'm kind of upset that you guys are going at it this way where there's no Black people here and you're deciding on our fate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. I really appreciate what you said there. Next, we're going to have Betty ask our second question. Candidates, just a reminder, you will have 3 minutes each, and we will be going again in the same alphabetical order. Betty, I believe you're muted.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. My name is Betty Bishop, and I've been an action leader for 6 years. And I have a question for the candidates. In addition to policing, how would you address racial injustice in education, housing, and social services?
Councilperson Brakes, you have 3 minutes.
All right, thanks for that question. I think that the path to trying to rectify racial injustice starts on an individual basis. I think every individual who's not a person of color, not a Black person, not an Indigenous person, needs to do a big, strong check about what privileges they've had in their lives and how they've advantaged from that. And that's an ongoing work that I've experienced. And I think that's a first step. I think that to address that, you also need to understand how outcomes impact people who don't have the privilege that you have. Today, I just got the most recent COVID numbers. 46% of COVID people in Washoe County are Hispanic. They're dying at higher proportions and hospitalized than their population in our community. And that is not a good thing. That is not a good outcome. And what are the factors in that? A lot of that are economic conditions. The essential workers, the workforce that they have, the protections that they have are putting them at risk. And also health care too is putting them at risk. And you know, it's about how does that distill down to the city? At the city level, we provide opportunities for people to be healthy. You can be a lot more healthier when you have a nicer environment to go walk and recreate in, a well-furnished park in closer proximity to you than in some neighborhoods where you don't have a lot of those. So that's a very important thing. The thing that I've learned after 8 years on city council is really that we need reform in our city government to make it more responsive. And that was the second part of the question that Betty did not mention. And I'll bring it up. I did receive an award earlier in this year, it seems like a century ago, from the NAACP at their Martin Luther King banquet for some steps that I made to try to bring justice to our people who are tenants in our community. I'm getting hit on it on the political campaign, but we need to bring people who are tenants into the conversation. That hasn't happened. They're half of our population, and we stood up a board, and Mr. Reese supported that, for a tenants concern board. But we also need campaign finance reform and lobbying reform, and I've done some of that, and I'm going to do more of that in my 4th year. So everyone has a voice at City Hall, not just those who can write checks to lobbyists or campaign funds. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilperson Brakes. We're going to move on now to Mr. Draculich. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think when it comes down to any racial injustice, one of the most important things we can look at in any of those segments is opportunity, making sure they have the opportunity that the same as everybody else does. No policies or initiatives should stop them or help another. It should be equal. I think that has a lot to do with housing. That's why I strongly support initiatives that focus on building and preserving diverse housing segments for our low-income individuals, which include things like transitional and permanent supportive housing enhance shelter services in the affordable housing price range. I also support diverse housing segments in affluent neighborhoods where we have higher rated schools and more resources. An economically diverse neighborhood is a healthy one. I think it's good for all parties. In attending the immigration forum last year, I learned there is actually a pretty strong bond and respect between our law enforcement and undocumented citizens, but I learned that we need more legal services to help them process their citizenship applications. Pretty much dozens of stories came up and they all had a unique situation. One person waiting for 10 years or 30 and poor paperwork issues. And in reality, they're just fighting for their citizenship of working here, contributing to our community. So I would support any initiatives that assist in that legal process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Next will be Ms. Fink. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, so I have a slightly different perspective on this, having myself grown up in Sun Valley, because I see a lot of the thing that comes up with inequity in education, housing, and social services. That has to do with poverty. You know, poverty is at the root of a lot of this. And I believe that people, you know, there's that saying that you dedicate your life to that which you give your time. I mean, I believe in education, and I believe that's the huge equalizer here. I didn't spend 23 years out at Job Corps helping that population, helping people who really need it, because I don't believe in it. I believe that is the key to this whole thing. And I know it's very difficult for people to be able to focus on education if they have housing insecurities or they have problems at home and don't know where they'll be living from, you know, 1 month to the next or 1 week to the next. So all of this is very relevant, and these are all issues that need to be addressed. And I mean, I probably couldn't be any paler than I am, but that doesn't mean that I don't have an empathy for what happens with people. You know, when I was at Job Corps, I used to say, all my children are my favorite children. And they never expressed to me that they felt that I was different from them because I appeared the way I appeared to you today. You know, I'm just grateful to be in a position where I could have helped people for all that time. And I would hope that should I be elected to the Reno City Council, that I could help more people on a larger scale. And that's why I'm running. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Our next person will be Ms. Leon. You have 3 minutes.
All right, first I want to thank Donald for what he said, and also remind Donald that we have met. And I am so excited about Black Wall Street, and we have plans to talk again. While I've been here in Nevada, I've tried to figure out many things. One of the things I've tried to figure out is schooling, because all the schools get the same amount of money, yet so many schools are so much better off than others. And I've learned that that has to do with parents and parents advocating. And that has led me to believe, just with all of my being, that we have to build our urban infill housing everywhere. We need housing at all income levels in every school zone. I live in one of the older parts of the community. I live in one of the least financially well-off parts of the city, and this is where people think of when they think that they want the infill to go in, that this is where we can put the more housing in. But we should be putting in mid-story apartment buildings and multi-story townhouses down into Monte Ranch and down, you know, in South Meadows, in every single school zone in the city. Because education, well, the disparities do come from poverty in so many ways. And while I also want to work on better jobs and keeping those better jobs here, that's not this question. And education is not in the hands of city council. So the thing that city council can do about this disparity is within permitting and zoning, and where we decide that the city needs to improve itself and how the city needs to do that. And for me, that's through inclusive zoning throughout. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the question that I wrote. I'm a lifelong educator. And so my instinct is always, let's do some classes on that. And this is one thing when I was meeting with Donald at Black Wall Street and talking to some of the folks who were there about what they were interested in. I want to hold salons, or I want to help Donald hold salons, figure out like what are the things that the community wants to know about, and get experts in to talk and learn from the community and train up the community to teach themselves. That's my understanding of what Black Wall Street is trying to do. I've been wanting to do that in a variety of places. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the city to run salons out of the public library to increase things like, how does our city work? What's the city? What's the county? How do people get involved? So there are educational things that the city can do to get people more engaged. There's workforce training that we can invest more money in, where Darla Works is just an incredibly important and very limited thing. We need to get Job Corps more money. And housing where the schools are just, these are all just incredibly important and extend far beyond Ward 3 and far beyond just racial injustice. I think there's just a lot of economic injustice in our community as well, and we should work on all of that.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. Our final panelist will also have 3 minutes to answer the second question. Councilperson Reese.
Thank you again for the opportunity. I do think it's important, as I said in the last conversation that we had, about centering people of color in those conversations. It's very difficult for me to have a conversation about racial injustice, having not experienced it. I think from my perspective, because I'm tasked with making the decisions that come along as a member of a body that deliberates towards an end, that we have some things that we can do. First, with regard to education, our role is obviously very limited, as Ms. Leon said, because there is a school district and the state which really control that. But for our part, we have a role in the construction of schools and the remodeling of older schools, which often falls to low-income communities and income or communities where people of color are. So that's one thing. And then just last week, Councilmember Breckus and I led an effort to fund $3 million worth of laptops for the school district. So that's a thing where the city is not really traditionally tasked with taking that on, but we've made commitments to it. With regard to housing inequality, I think we can do things like end redlining. We can create community land trust. We can create affordable housing with the tools that we have. And some of those are small, they're micro tools, and some of them are larger. They're zoning tools, that kind of thing. And then the last question you asked was about social services. I think as a city, we don't do a lot in the social services arena. It's just not one of the core functions under our charter. But with regard to the things that we do, we encourage, for example, after school programs. So folks who need to have childcare have those. We support that through our Sierra School or Sierra Kids program. We also recognize the need for food security. So all of these things are important. I think it would be interesting in the next general cycle to talk a lot about what other cities are doing, including reparations, an argument that's being addressed internationally and even in cities in the United States. It takes a lot of forms, but it's something worth discussing and figuring out if that's one of the ways that we can remedy some of the injustices that are systemic and pervasive.
Thank you very much, Councilperson Reese. We will have Prince introduce the next question.
Hi, Prince Arun once again. I'm here with question number 3. COVID-19 has devastated local budgets. What would you do to address budget shortfalls?
We will again be going in alphabetical order, and each candidate will have 3 minutes, starting with Councilperson Breckus.
Okay, thank you for this question. Let me just say that I consider myself an expert on local revenues and budgets. I have a master's in public administration, and many years ago in my 20s, I took a number of municipal finance classes at the graduate level and worked as a city planner, but on the city council, that's where that early training and and follow through my career has really come into play. And because I came on during the Great Recession, when we were so constrained, so debt loaded, that it's really been my go-to subject area, not only for the city of Reno, but also we have so many different boards and commissions, which all their own revenue sources. And I want to say that we're still not sure what the devastation of the pandemic will be, but we do know that the reset to the Great Recession, where, as I said earlier, the city laid off a third of its workforce, we never recovered from it. Despite growing, many communities are ones in decline. Akron, Ohio, some of the Rust Belt, they're declining in their local economy, but they're also declining in their government's ability to provide services. We have a growing local economy, or had, and you can argue about how equitable that has been, that recovery and that economy that came on the Great Recession, and I will say it wasn't very equitable. But has not corresponded over to the Reno budget to make up the losses from the Great Recession or to meet the new demands of growth. And that's why I've been so focused on land use sprawl, because land use sprawl spreads your footprint out and it creates tremendous demand for services, parks, police, fire, particular, and most importantly, our Reno master plan that we did in the 2014 or so, when I came on the council as a first priority, as a planner, I wanted to see that done, says that that land will not be the most affordable housing. The most affordable housing, please remember this, will always be recycling land in Reno that's already been built in whatever form that takes, okay? So there are too many sacred cows of tax revenue in this region with their people, with their interests and their fingers on it. Did you know that the lodger's tax that is paid for by tourists, that hardly touches the Reno budget, goes to the Reno Convention Center to do billboards and invite bowlers, pay bowlers to come on vacation, does not provide your essential services. There's lock boxes within the city of Reno budget. The bill you pay to put in a hot water heater at your house, cover your roof, locked off, siphoned off from paying for core government services. All of these sacred cows in revenue sources need to go unchecked in this next recovery, downturn and recovery. And I'm a strong advocate to that. Thank you.
Ruckus, your time is up. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have to be a better example than some other debates we may have seen recently. Our next candidate, Mr. Draculich, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yeah, it's time to be proactive. The worst part right now is we don't really know the true impact of the budget and what the pandemic has done. But we have to start planning ahead and reignite things. A couple things important is we have to start the negotiation with our unions as to what they would prefer when the time comes, whether it's pay cuts or layoffs. This needs to be a conversation, a decision between the city and the bargaining units. They very much have an opinion on either option, and they are best fit to represent their members. But most importantly, we need to continue to follow safety protocols, but find ways to reopen our local economy. Businesses and citizens in our community have proven to follow safety guidelines, so let's strategize on how to adapt and bring our community closer to a pre-pandemic economy. That sales tax is crucial to us, obviously property tax as well, which as much as real estate is doing well, sales are down, so we need to be looking at that. I also want to collaborate and hear ideas from individual businesses on how they can safely increase activity with intentions to rehire the employees that were let go. We also need to re-engage with our hotel casinos as to a solution to our budget shortfall that comes from the severely diminished room tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Ms. Fink, you have 3 minutes, same question.
Okay, well, part of my past also, I was the finance director at Job Corps, so I handled facilities and procurement and constant reductions of a very substantial budget. So I am very familiar with how to make hard choices and what kind of decisions, where you actually have areas that you can cut back in. Now, I know that the city of Reno has instituted a hiring freeze, you know, with exception from the beginning of the pandemic. And that's been very effective because the personnel budget along with benefits makes up 81% of their budget. So so when they stopped hiring people and filling those positions, that as they became empty, they saved a substantial amount of money. And you can see how that would help the budget. And it has helped counterbalance some of those losses that were received from the cancellation of events. So also, I know that the property taxes for this year were already set, so that income did not get affected. So this year, I don't think the city is in a huge world of hurt, because they have a finance director who's capable and understands what they can go in and cut. And she went through all the departments and found areas where they could cut back. It's a doable thing. And when the benefit is, because I have a background in finance, I can look at those budgets and understand exactly what I'm looking at, just like Jenny. So that's a huge benefit for me. But I don't, I do not feel like we want to go after people's benefits. I think they worked hard for that, and I believe in collective bargaining, and I would support personnel. I'm not saying we should cut personnel. I'm saying perhaps people are just going to have to try to do more for now with what we've got, and people will have to multitask. And I know everybody's been asking us to do more with less forever, but that's just how it's going to have to be until we can figure out exactly the extent of the damage done by the pandemic and how quickly we can rebound. I mean, that is a huge thing. We should be looking at ways to funnel our resources so that we can help businesses rebound. And I have a couple ideas about that, which I'll talk about on the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Leon, you have 3 minutes.
So before I start, I just want to kind of bottom line it for people who are listening and wondering why none of us are talking about taxes. It's not really because nobody wants to touch the third rail. It's because Reno City is not allowed to raise taxes. It's just not one of the tools we have in our toolboxes. So this question is much more difficult than it might have seemed at first. That's not something we can do. We do have some things where we could raise money. We could raise your gas tax. We could raise permitting fees. But anything that we would do like that would be just incredibly damaging to very specific segments of the city. And I don't think that those are viable solutions. The city of Reno, as folks have pointed out, has been in tough times for a while. We've never gotten flush. We've never started funding confetti, right? Everything in the budget, we've got to assume pretty much needs to be there. What we have not done as a city is establish the goalposts. We don't know what our top priorities are, the things that we absolutely must fund. And therefore, we don't know what isn't our top priority. And I think the way that we manage the city budget through the length of this catastrophe is by doing that and then combing through the budget. And there are only hard decisions left. I mean, I love Darla's optimism that this year isn't that hard, and I hope she's right, although I sat through a budget meeting and I'm not sure, but I hope you're right. But we only have hard decisions to make. We're gonna have to cut some things that we don't wanna cut, but we have to make sure that we know what we don't wanna cut. And we have to look at the things that are in lockboxes. And one that I know we can't touch, and I'm not saying we should, it's just one of the lock boxes that I know of, is that there's funds that come in off of hotel rooms that fund public art. That is a box that we don't get to touch because the voters decided that that money got spent that way. But we have a lot of things like that where we can look at them and say, is this something that we can redistribute? Is it more important that it's doing what it's doing now, given that we know our absolute priorities are the ones that we have set? And we haven't done that goal setting. And I don't know how we can go forward and do the budget management in this potentially huge catastrophe without having really clearly stated budget priorities to guide us.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. Same question, and our final panelist, Councilperson Reese, you have 3 minutes.
think they might want to have us go in reverse alphabetical order once in a while so that I don't get the benefit of sitting and listening to all the good commentary. But you've made a lot of good points tonight. Obviously, the city has instituted some measures, and so Councilmember Breckus and I can speak to the things that we have done, and those are indications of what our track record will be. There is a hiring freeze. It has been very important to have one. We've also made choices about reducing spending. I think we've saved $1 million in supplies and services. We've also looked at not transferring things to certain kinds of governmental funds that don't necessarily have to be made. And so our budget director came to us with a suite of options, which included things like, hey, we don't have to fully fund our workers' comp liability this year. We need to fund it, but it just means that we can push it off a year until we see where we are with our stuff. And so it's important to make data-driven choices. I think it's also important that we also look for and identify new revenue sources. My colleague, Councilmember Breckus, and my colleague, Councilmember Jordan, have been very big advocates for making sure that we look at the way in which we interact with our county partner, for example, whether we really should be sharing or shouldering the burden for some of the services that we provide, for which they actually have a tax that they do not tap into that could better provide those services. That's really in the social services sector with homelessness. And so that's something that we've got to do. We've got to take our collective muscle and we've got to saddle up to our partner, the county, and we've got to say, hey, we're hurting. We all know that we can make some efforts here in this area. You got to take on what should be your responsibility under the law, which is primarily social service driven. And you've got to come alongside us and make sure that we can provide some of those core services, or you're going to have to do it. One way or the other is going to have to be done. Councilmember Breckus and I were big advocates in council several weeks ago for going to the legislature in the next legislative cycle and asking our community if they want to have some kind of a tax occur to pay for public recreation facilities and then public safety, then the community is going to have to make that decision. It's very difficult for us to sit as a body and try to do those things because we need the input of our citizens, our community. So it's about finding revenue sources that we can hold on to. It's about saving money where we can. It's about making hard choices with the kind of services that we provide and maybe working with our partners to make sure that we can get them provided. And then it's also about identifying new revenue sources.
Thank you very much, Councilperson Reese. We have our next question asked by Betty. Just a reminder to everyone, all candidates have 3 minutes and it is in alphabetical order.
Thanks, Lily. The fourth question we'd like to ask the candidates is, COVID-19 has further worsened an already severe housing crisis in Nevada. How would you address housing security issues?
Councilperson Breckus, you have 3 minutes.
Sorry about that.
Okay, it starts.
Okay. You know, others touched on this. Homelessness and housing are separate topics, but not unrelated. And I do want to talk about homelessness because, Action, you've been such an advocate that the county exercise really the only piece of revenue on the table to bring to bear on the housing issue, and that's their general services tax. And when they set up that trust fund well over a year ago, what have the Board of County Commissioners done? Sat on their hands. That revenue source, in my view, and I'm just one opinion, needs to be exercised now to provide services to our homeless population. That is the crisis that is going on, and they need to step up to that game. And fully own and embrace that role of human services. But on the housing end, the city of Reno is the one responsible for housing in terms of the subsidized market, because we have the housing authority, we get most of the federal resources. We're in such an odd world right now in terms of we don't know what COVID's doing, because on the one hand, we know the governor has an eviction hold until October 15th. We don't know what he'll do with that. He'll extend it or not. But we also know, and certainly we know because we're sitting on the Reno City Council trying to pour out money that has come to us from the federal government to bridge the gap for people who have experienced economic calamity in their lives to stay housed. So we don't have a clear idea what's going on, and it's fluid and we're in a situation, but I think that the city's doing the best they can, and you know, we still don't know. It also plays up to what the federal government's going to do. They seem to be taking a break on future relief activities until after the election. And that's going to be a problem for us if they don't allow us some extension of some of the time frame to move forward in spending that money to get it out to people in need. But on the other side, as I said, on the non-subsidized housing market, housing production is very important in Reno, and we have a pretty liberal zoning code in terms of allowing multifamily housing in our commercial zones. A lot of places don't do that, and we always have done that. I brought a granny flat ordinance to the Reno City Council. We probably would have had 1,000 units of those smaller units built by then, but the council did not support that. We'll see if someone else brings that forward in the next 4 years. It won't be me. I've made that promise, but it is an idea that is bringing a lot of units into communities. And I embrace density. I'm in a garage unit right now, second story, looking down at a back alley apartment. So I do live with that. We also have some disparities in the fees that we set. We are subsidizing growth and not allowing.
Marcus, your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next panelist, Mr. Draculich, you have 3 minutes.
Thanks. Yeah, very much an important topic. I think number one or number two in my ward. I do very much think the homelessness issue is tied to our housing crisis. Many of the people I interact with, one, the Eddie House and I've come across on this campaign, are talking about being priced out of rentals or the ability to own, or they're struggling to make fresh rents. I think what's really missing is something I want to attack right when I'm your councilman. Is my first proposal will be to recruit and hire a national grant writer. The city of Reno once had this position, but was lost due to the last recession. And probably many of you know Nevada is a donor state, which means we give more in federal taxes than we receive back into our community. This grant writer will be focused on acquiring federal and non-local private funding aimed at financing and preserving low-income housing solutions. I want to see things like transitional and permanent supportive housing that can support our elderly, disabled, and veterans. I also think that housing segment will help free up some other opportunities for low-income individuals. But I do also support infill projects and want to proactively negotiate with our builders to build in the affordable and attainable price ranges. It's time that we accept that our growth is here and we have to manage it in a smart and controlled approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Next, we have Ms. Fink. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, well, as I said earlier, I did get my real estate license when I was 19. And when I was, I don't know, probably 10 years old, my mother was a realtor also. We were driving along one day and I saw them building in a pasture that I'd always loved. You know, it was a nice bucolic setting. And I looked at my mother and I accusingly blamed her of that for having that happen. You know, why are you doing this? You're ruining the environment. You know how you can be all grand when you're a child. She looked at me and she said, you know, people have families and when they grow up, they have to have places to live. And I hope you don't think you're going to be living with me when you grow up. And I was like, you know, my mother had a way of saying things that made me just understand. So we have a direction to go here that is fraught with challenges. You know, we have to really address environmental issues. And I would agree with my colleagues here talking about, you know, the infill solution. We have to have more growth in order to accommodate more people, and we have to have more growth in order to bring our housing costs down. And all of that has to be done in an intelligent way so we can support infrastructure and not overburden our streets, you know, so that we have these horrible traffic problems or parking, or you see people parked all over the street. I mean, you know, all of that is very complicated, and none of these decisions are ones that can be taken lightly. And on the same token, there's got to be a lot done to make sure that people have equal access to all this housing. So I think we need to look at more programs to help people get funding to actually buy real estate, you know, buy their first house. Because my understanding is that Reno is about 50% rental. People don't own their houses. So 50% that do, and that's good. But the other 50%, we have to find ways in order to get them to be able to be homeowners as well. You know, they should all get the joys of, you know, repairing their toilets. And joys of living in your own house, you know, and that gives you a good sense of accomplishment. So I would be the one who is willing to help out with that on city council and look at all these things with the big picture. You got to have your eye on the big picture and try to make sure that everybody's included and we can bring those costs down. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. King. Ms. Leon.
Hi, my name is Rudy and I'm a lifelong renter. I have no intention of being anything other than a lifelong renter. And I think that it's been made really clear here tonight that this is a voice that is missing from the Reno City Council. My opponent associates rental with severe poverty. I have no interest in owning a house. I am delighted to pick up the phone and call the landlord and say, hey, the furnace is out. Nothing gives me more joy. I don't want to own. And I don't believe that most of the 50% who rent do. Renting is a way people live. And it's a choice people make about how they live. So I think that we need to be crystal clear about that when we talk about housing crisis. I have a fantastic landlord. I pay about 60% of market rate. I've lived here for 4 years. He could have doubled my rate since I moved in. We've gone up by 25 bucks, and for that, I get him to mow the lawn. We need more landlords like that, but we can't legislate that. What we can do, though, is, you know, there are folks on council who are prone to saying we really can't tell property owners what they can do with their property, and I call BS on that. We have two obligations in law that say that we are in fact obligated to do that. We have a master plan, which is the city saying, here's what you can do with your property, and you can't do anything outside of this. And the permitting process, where we say, here's what you can do with your property. So we have levers at our disposal where the people that Reno citizens elect decide what the city looks like through a lot of processes, right? There was a huge planning process with almost an overwhelming amount of input opportunities, right? Where people got to talk about the city they wanted to live in. We have an obligation to do that and to stick with it and to use the levers that we have at hand to do that. We can use city property that other people want from us, and they want to get it from us for very little money. And we could give it to them for very little money and say, but we're going to take half your rent for the next 20 years. And we're going to use that to subsidize affordable units. And by affordable units, I mean units at $1,000 to $2,000 a month. I'm not talking about poverty. I'm talking about people who make the average household income, which is $54,000 a year. Those are people who are renting. We need to use the levers and the resources and the property that we have to ensure that we create the Reno that everybody can live in. If business owners can't afford to pay people what they have to make to live in Reno, they aren't going to live here. So it's in everybody's best interest to make sure that the city uses the tools that it has to make sure that there is housing for people who make what business owners can afford to pay. The higher we can make that, the better.
Very much, Ms. Leon. Same question, final panelist, Councilperson Reese, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. So housing security, as I indicated when we started this evening, has been something that I'm passionate about because I know what it means to my family and to our family for generations to come. But housing security is an amorphous term. It encompasses housing instability, affordability, safety, housing quality, neighborhood safety, neighborhood quality, and homelessness, none of which we can cover in 3 minutes. So I'm going to focus on homelessness. I am someone who believes that we should have, for example, a homeless bill of rights, something that acknowledges the importance of our unsheltered population and their positionality in this community. I am someone who believes that we should have trauma-informed care models that come alongside our homeless population and find ways for them to find permanent supportive housing. That is the kind of thing that a city can do and should be doing. It is a difficult situation to be in, to watch people who are living along the river, which is not a safe place to live. They're living along the freeways, also not a safe place to live. But until we make a decision, until we come alongside with our county partners, some faith-based groups, some private enterprises, and find a way forward, we're going to be continually chasing this issue. Again, housing security means a lot of things, and there could be a lot of different variations of it. I've only spoken to homelessness, but hopefully you understand where I'm coming from when I say we have a lot of work that we can do. We've got to be better. We've got to do better than we have done, and I'm committed to doing that.
Thank you very much, Councilperson Reese. Everyone, this has been really enjoyable. We are going to move on to our final question before our closing statement. So you'll have 2 more times to speak. Prince will delight us with the final question, and we will have 3 minutes as well for each person to respond.
I actually can't find the final question. I'm sorry.
The final question is, do you want me to read it? I don't want to take your time.
I really don't know where it is, unfortunately. Sorry.
Okay,
So feel free to go ahead.
In light of the continued gentrification of the 4th Street corridor, what would be your plan to handle the needs of low-income and unsheltered residents currently being served in that area? Councilperson.
Are you talking about West 4th or East 4th? Because they really are different characteristics.
It doesn't specify, so you can use your own discretion, Councilperson.
Okay. Well, let me talk about West 4th Street, because that is in Ward 1. Now, when we did our, someone said East 4th Street. Well, I'm going to go talk about West 4th Street. It's in the news a bit, and I don't want it to lose focus either, because there is a lot of potential there. When we did our downtown plan, which was very important, I advocated it when I came on in 2012. We need a plan for downtown. We looked at downtown. Our consultant said that northwest quadrant is very amorphous, doesn't have a clear definition, needs some consideration. And I said, okay, we'll do a sub-plan. And that's what they said. And I tried to get the council to do that, and the council would not do that. They balked at that. Mr. Reese wasn't on them, so I'm not going to lay it on his feet. But the Jacobs group, well, at the same time, had come in and bought about 24 acres, where they ultimately destroyed about 300 residential units. And they lobbied to not have a participatory community plan about West 4th Street, because they wanted to stay in control. And, you know, in a planning process, you can do regulations, you can vision and think about what's best for the community, but you can also make your public infrastructure commitments. And that's where West 4th Street stands. So I was not someone who stood and applauded Mr. Jacobs when he had his demolition bulldozers. And I've held him accountable, and I've voted against the wants that he's tried to get from the city council, including parking lots and other city-owned property that he's been able to option without any requirements. So, but where are we with Mr. Jacobs and West 4th Street? We have a blank template. It'll be interesting to see where he goes from that. He does have private property rights. Will he build? I don't know. When you get to a situation where you've torn down that much land, what gets built is luxury housing if housing gets built. That's not helpful to anyone. That's why it was so important for me to hope that he would renovate a lot of those apartments, but he saw otherwise. And it was a missed opportunity in that corridor, and it'll have to probably sit for another, maybe we'll see another, hopefully not another boom cycle. But that housing is not something that, in the capacity of a city council, I cheered for him. I actually called him out because that was displacement. But with it, we haven't seen anything, almost worse, in not having anything built at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilperson Breckus. Next will be Mr. Draculich. You have 3 minutes.
All right, thanks, Lily. And I apologize, I didn't know this. I don't think we had this as a question on the questionnaire, so not fully prepared, but ultimately do have a heartfelt connection with one. I guess if we're talking about West 4th Street, I have a lot to learn about how that conspired, but I did support taking down those blighted motels. Why I have supported that is I learned during my time at Eddie House, we had a very important client. His name was Devontae. He was in his low 20s, a big culture piece for us, very important. And what happened was he was like many homeless youth and anybody low income situation is they were sharing those blighted motels with each other. 7 kids would throw in $5 a night, but there's only a room for 2. And so most of the kids slept on the floor. So what happened is that Devontae slept on the floor pretty consistently during the winter. And he ended up going to the hospital and finding he had a bacterial infection in his heart. The only answer was a heart transplant. And as a homeless youth, you do not get on the list for a heart unless you can actually prove you can, recover from there. So 6 months in the hospital, and we're now $2 million later in a loss of life, all because we had kids living in blighted motels that are completely substandard living conditions. I think it's also a misnomer too that this is low-income housing, but in reality, at a daily and a weekly rate, this is actually more expensive than a potential smaller 1-bedroom or rental situation when you're sharing with another occupant. So I'm not really a fan of that approach. And I also understand that Jacobs Entertainment helped place those people in those motels, in a timely manner and took care of those costs. So I think that's not advertised as much. I know I'm probably going to run out of time to talk about East 4th, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Ms. Fink, you have 3 minutes for our sudden death round.
Hey, I did not get that question either. Could you repeat it one more time?
Sure, and I do apologize. I don't know that I have a 5th question, so it's happening, okay? So in light of the continued gentrification of the 4th Street corridor, what would be your plan to handle the needs of the low-income and unsheltered residents currently being served in that area? And it can be East or West 4th. I am in your district and by East 4th, if you'd like to specify. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. Okay. So that area that you're referring to is definitely part of Ward 5. And, I actually go through there quite often. And I do see some gentrification, as you have referred to it. But regardless of where you build, if you displace low income, it has to go somewhere. So it's just going to move to other communities, or you will have more unsheltered. You have more homelessness. So I'm sure that most of you, well, I know a lot of people are familiar with what's happening currently with the plans for the super shelter that will be over in the Governor's Bowl. And, I'm somewhat confused about the way that whole thing transpired in terms of moving the unsheltered out of the event center and putting them into 2 temporary shelters right before winter, which seems to make no sense to me because at least in the event center, they would have had heat. And I know my opponent had quite a bit to do with making that decision. And, being as she is getting funding from casinos, it makes it a little questionable to me because, I know they wanted them out of there. And moving them to a place where they aren't going to be prepared for the winter does not make sense. And the super shelter, although the plan is to use CARES money to build that, it sounds like an excellent idea, but it can't possibly be completed before January at the earliest, and that would take a miracle. So even with the 30-year temporary buildings that they plan to put up. So it's a huge problem, and I think that in order to have somebody effectively represent that area, it can't be somebody who's really has a huge conflict involved with what it is you're trying to accomplish there. So for me, I think, we have what we have already, and we need to go forward and just be a little smarter about thinking the whole thing through. But
30.
I really don't, I don't know exactly how to finish that sentence other than to say, all projects have to be looked at on an individual basis for their merit and the impact on the existing community. So you really have to think about where you're putting people when you put in these projects. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Our next panelist is Ms. Leon. You have 3 minutes.
It is a sudden death match. So, I mean, the East 4th Street corridor is in part within my ward. But what comes to mind when I think about that is the instigating moment that got me to run was the Nevada Department of Transportation came and talked to my neighborhood advisory board about the Spaghetti Bowl project and happened to mention offhandedly, like it didn't really matter, that 300 homes were going to be taken down in the process of that. And that is on what, 8th Street, 9th Street? We're not talking about far above. We're talking about the same neighborhood, more or less, if not on 4th Street. And we absolutely need to fix the Spaghetti Bowl, but I don't think that at a time when we have zero attainable housing, we can afford to displace 300 families from where they live without taking that into consideration. So that's actually what got me to decide to run, that we weren't looking at the repercussions of the decisions that we made. And while we may have limited legal responsibilities, NDOT has to house people in comparable housing, but I don't know what comparable means. People choose where they live for any of 500 different reasons. So what is our moral obligation to people that we are displacing in the process of needed development? And I think that goes hand in hand with a lot of what's happening around 4th Street. I am a firm believer in housing first. I am, like Darla, confused about how the tent shelters came to be. That was not what was approved at the CHAB meeting. The 2 weeks before it was brought to City Council, a safe camp was proposed. And all of a sudden it was a tent shelter, which is not the same and does nothing to protect 8th Amendment rights, which the CHAB meeting dealt with in depth and was why they approved the safe camp. So there is a lot going on around the unhoused and unsheltered and the precarious in our community. When the housing eviction protections end, there's going to be a lot more going on with folks living on the streets in our community. And we must make a commitment to the moral obligations to our residents who live here, whether they live in houses or in tents. Those are places they live. Shelters are not places where they live. And we have to keep that front of mind, that these are residents who are looking for safe places to live. It's not just that the river is in crisis. Over 3,000 residents in Reno are in crisis. And we have to think about that. And I have about 15 ideas for ways that we could do some of that financially. But my time is up.
Thank you, Ms. Leon. And thank you everyone for tolerating that this sudden death round. Our final panelists will have 3 minutes for this question. Councilperson Reese.
Thank you again, Lily. I mean, I have touched on many of the issues throughout the evening as, addressing the kind of issues that would be interwoven in the question. So I guess what I'd like to talk about with my 3 minutes is 2 things. One is the environmental justice component of all of this. I think it needs to be said that where people live and that housing quality and safety and security is part of the conversation. So whatever model we adopt going forward as a community going forward, even in gentrified housing situations, we have to recognize that there are equity and environmental justice concerns that have to be addressed in that. And I don't think that anyone has particularly addressed that. I think it is an important concern when you look at the development of any kind of community, especially along that entire corridor. You know, east to west, it is a unique area. On the far end of 4th Street, you're seeing new housing construction starts with apartments at the old Wildflower Village. And then as you move forward, you're seeing a lot of other things. The second thing I want to talk about with my time is the component of East 4th Street that includes this village on Sage Street. I think it's an excellent example of where public, faith-based communities and private partnerships come together to create a really incredible opportunity for the 220 so plus residents who are living along that area. And I think it's worth mentioning that these things don't come about just by magic. It has to take the whole city's efforts in making sure the zoning and the building all happens, that the environmental remediation happens appropriately. It takes the faith-based community to make that happen. And these are the ways we have to focus on providing housing opportunities that may not look like traditional housing opportunities, but maybe they're things like the Village on Sage Street, or there are things like the Hope's Tiny House Village. All of these things are part of what we can do, and I'm looking forward to doing it in the next 4 years.
Thank you very much, Councilperson Reese. Again, I would like to thank everybody for answering these questions today, and I look forward to talking with you more. As you know, I enjoy speaking with each and every one of you. Now it is time for our candidate closing statements and pledge. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to provide a closing statement. We would like to know if you will pledge to meet with action leaders. If elected, do you pledge to meet with action leaders within the first 100 days of your term to discuss how best to implement the new normal? That is a yes or no. And then you also have 2 minutes for your closing statement. We will start with Councilperson Breckus.
All right. Well, yes, I will meet with Action folks. I think in my capacity on the council, I've already met with you folks this year, and I got your infographic of your priorities. I think it was maybe January already. This year is such a blur. I want to go back to a few things. This one is there's a lot of issues of complexity before the city council, and it's very important to focus on what the city does and what we have an ability to control and in our purview. And housing costs as related to your sewer and your trash, and even as you sit on Tumwa, your water bills, those all go into monthly household expenses. And if you're a renter, they roll into your rent. And those are foremost to me. We didn't inherit the best waste management contract, but I make a lot of time to make sure it's going to be enforced. It'll be a good one coming forward. And sewer rates have gone up 34% since I've been on the council. So they're foremost in my mind, especially as large investment is being demanded from the North Valleys. I don't want that to be carried on the backs of Central Reno, where we need the new affordable housing production. So rate structuring there is a very complex issue, but we've got to get it right. I also want to say that in terms of equity, we are in such an exciting time, and I am optimistic about the future. When has all of humanity experienced one thing, which is this pandemic? We're all united, whatever our ethnicity, whatever our race, whatever our economic circumstance. And in Reno, where we're experiencing the climate emergency upon us with these smoky days, everyone's suffering that too. Maybe in your house it's not as well as others, but it's a time to think united and have leadership that is going to be for all, and talk about how we are all so connected. I'm very excited about that, and that's what I'll be doing with my leadership and communicating.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your time is up. Thank you very much. Mr. Draculich, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, to your pledge, absolutely. You'll find that I have a huge heart and open mind. I definitely don't have the answers to everything. I'm very much collaborative. I think meeting with people like yourself and anybody in the community is vital. In closing, I think we need fresh ideas and a fresh perspective on the homeless issue. There's been no sense of urgency over the past several years, and I'm going to work tirelessly to make an impact on that population. We also need collaboration with our community stakeholders and other elected officials so that we can operate in a shared ownership of our problems, which includes the housing crisis and how to recover economically from the pandemic. Being combative and creating conflict with fellow council members is not the right way to serve my ward or the community. I know it's important for my neighbors to have an independent voice on the council, and I am that candidate, but I also have the ability to work well alongside my colleagues. Thank you so much for your time, guys, and anybody out there in my ward. I do appreciate your vote when you cast your ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Draculich. Ms. Fink, you have 2 minutes for your closing statement and a yes or no to the pledge to meet with Action and community leaders.
Okay, so absolutely yes to action. I'm an action kind of girl. I mean, I want to just say that right now. And I want to say how much I appreciate you having this forum. I know it's really hard for voters to get through the long list of different candidates, and actually being able to see people and listen to them talk it's got to be a huge bonus for people. And thank you for doing this and bringing up such important issues. So just, I would like to say that, you know, I've already said I haven't taken outside contributions, and I can get things done on city council because I come to you with no baggage, just the education and experience to get us through the upcoming budget problems. Remember, I was a finance director, so I know budgets. I know how to make hard choices. I'm not afraid to make them. Problem solving and effective budget conscious policy implementation is my forte. Above all else, I understand people and what motivates them. I was also a counselor and counseling manager at Job Corps, and that's huge because I know how to listen. I know that everyone has a story, and believe me, once you know someone's story, you can't help but love them. So in closing, I'm Darla Fink. I'm your truly transparent representative candidate for Reno City Council, Ward 5. I'm asking for your support and your vote, and I'm looking forward to when the COVID crisis is over and meet you all in person. Thank you. And thanks for this opportunity. In the meantime, www.thinkfink2020.com or at thinkfink2020.
Thank you, Ms. Ms. Leon, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, of course I will meet with Action. Maybe not in my first 30 days, but like 31. Give me some time to figure out up from down, but yes, absolutely.
You have 100 days.
Well, right, I'm just saying, like, you don't have to wait to day 99. This is, you know, the part of my campaign that got completely overturned by COVID. I can only represent myself. I intended to meet every single person who lived in my ward and go door to door and talk to everybody so that people would know that I am here for them, that I need to hear from people in order to represent them. I can only represent myself if I don't do that. So I would be delighted to meet with Action. I meet with members of Action on a monthly basis at the Social Action Committee at Temple Sinai, where I'm a member. We are very involved with Action. I think that what I want to close with is to tell you that I show up. This is my 6th forum, and at none of them has my opponent showed up. I held 5 town halls. He held none. In the last 4 years, he's held none. I'm here. I'm out every weekend at one park or another trying to talk to people about who I am and what I'm for. I answered a phone call at 8 o'clock this morning with someone who wanted to pick a fight with me. Got my number off the website and I talked him down and got his vote. I am here. I show up. I want to talk to you. I want to know what your concerns are.
30.
My opponent doesn't. And I think that that's really, really important. Do you want a representative who is there for you, representing you, or someone who's afraid to talk to the people who are voting him in or out?
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Leon. It is always wonderful to see you. And final panel member, Councilperson Reese.
Well, thank you to Action for hosting us this evening. Obviously, the answer is yes, I will meet with you. I I have met with you. I will continue to do so. And I believe it's an important part of this community that sometimes is overlooked, and that is that faith-based community partner that is going to do the work of social justice. So I'm honored to spend the evening with each of you tonight. And really, it's been a privilege to just share a little bit of my heart. What I wanted to say in closing is simply this. Most of you know me as a lawyer. I am a lawyer by profession. I've spent 20 years representing working men and women in this community. But I thought maybe I'd tell you something you might not know about me, which is I was a youth pastor and an elder in my church for a long time. And the reason why I mention it is because some people ask me, what is the greatest skill set that you bring to public life and public office? And I think they're angling to ask if the lawyering piece of it is what's important. And the truth is, it's that pastoring, it's that ministerial ministry function of my life that I think is most important. It informs who I am as a person. It certainly helps me to understand people. This job is, after all, about public service. And in serving people, you get to know their wants, their needs, their hopes, their dreams, their desires, and their shortcomings. And so I just let you all know that I love Reno, happy to be and humbled to be serving in this capacity, and would love to do it for the next 4 years. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Maria to give us a little voter education. I really appreciate all of you candidates for participating in this, and Action for having me as well.
Thank you so much. Really quickly, just wanted to apologize for the fifth question. I know we didn't have preparation for that, but thank you to all of our candidates for being flexible and adaptable for that. Also wanted to remind everyone that Action is a nonpartisan organization, and we do not support or endorse any political party or candidate. I wanted to do a little bit of voter education. Due to COVID-19, there are 3 ways to vote in the 2020 general election. It is vote by mail, drop off the ballot, or vote in person. In order to vote by mail, you can complete your ballot at home and mail it in. There is no postage that is required. All ballots must be postmarked by November 3rd, 2020 in order to be counted. In order to drop off your ballot, after receiving and completing your mail-in ballot, you can drop it off yourself during early voting, which is October 17th to October 30th, and on election day, which is November 3rd, at designated drop-off locations. To vote in person, you can vote in person during early voting, again, October 17th to October 30th, and on election day, which is November 3rd, at designated polling locations. Please make sure that you take a screenshot of these important dates. Mail-in ballots will be sent to all active registered voters in Washoe County starting October 2nd. All mail-in ballots must be postmarked, again, by November 3rd. And to ensure that you receive a ballot in the mail, check your voter registration is up to date at registertovotnv.gov. Again, these are very important dates, so we will repeat them again. October 17th to 30th is early voting, and election day is November 30th. Some things we want to uplift is our Action Voter Guide, which is available in English and Spanish. It was released on October 1st on our website. In closing, I want to uplift some ways in which some of y'all can get involved in creating this new normal that we have been talking about this evening. Please make sure that you download Outvote and enter the code 836038. We now have an opportunity for you to be able to text your friends and family and get them involved in the new normal as well. We also have our next candidate forum, which will be for the city of Sparks, and it will be on Tuesday, October 13th at 5:30 p.m. We really appreciate everyone joining us this evening, especially all of our candidates, and we hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you again for everyone who joined us this evening. We hope you have a great evening.